Hmm. So I'm here with Odile Nicole, who is an artist, a facilitator, and an integration coach, and also a very good friend of mine. And the topic today is what is Tantra? And I picked this topic because it's come up in some of our conversations many times. And I thought it would be an interesting dialogue to do for the Yoga International Day, because I feel like it's a very popular thing right now. It's a very, it seems like it's very fashionable right now, especially here in Spain. I've seen a lot of like tantric online courses coming up. And since we've talked about this other times, I thought, well, this would be an interesting topic to approach. Can you start, Odile, by telling us your personal experience with Tantra and your path?
Yeah, first, Veronica, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me here and for asking me about this topic. I don't refer to myself as a tantric practitioner exactly. I don't have a certain lineage in the classical sense. So in like the classical yoga sense or classical Buddhism, yeah, I don't follow a tantric lineage. And I do have two teachers that I've been working with for about a decade. Both of them, I would say, have a tantric framework. And out of my own experience and my own practice, I have my own way of seeing what that means. Then this has just come and evolved over the years.
So I was reading Tantra during the quarantine. So I found, let me start with that, because so I found this book when I moved to Spain. It's from the 70s. It's called Yoga, Tantra, and Sexuality. And it's in Spanish. And it's by some author I've never heard of before. And it's from like, let me see the year, because it's pretty, 1976. I wasn't even born. And I during the quarantine, I don't know why I thought, well, I think this is the best moment to read this book, because it's really thick. It's like very written, like very serious, and very like, let's give the method and the ritual, and let's talk about the practices of the real Tantra. But it's written like with a very 70s voice, where like these people were, and it's in Spanish. It's obviously like a Spanish author or French author translated into Spanish. So I'm thinking like whoever wrote it was trying to give credit to this very misunderstood practice, and was doing it in a very like dry, methodical kind of language. And there was nothing to do in the quarantine, so I actually read it. And it actually made me more confused about Tantra than more clear on it, because it's very dense and it's very focused on the ritual. And I didn't realize Tantra or the tantric practices were so ritualistic, because my misconception about Tantra all these years, through the yoga practice and through just like hearsay, or when people talk about it or discuss it, has always been that it's like this sexual practice, and that it's all about desire and accepting desire, and accepting like that everything is divine, and that men postpone ejaculation, and there's multiple orgasms. And then I read this really dry book during the quarantine, and I was like, what is Tantra really? Like, what is going on? I don't get it. And so then I found this author, Daniel Odier. I haven't
I really like him.
Yeah, do you? So I haven't read any of his books yet, but I was kind of like perusing stuff on the web to see like what he's written about. And one of the quotes that caught my eye that he said was, no other discipline has been dragged through the mud more than Tantra. And I thought that was interesting, because it seems like such a misunderstood practice. And now it's a commodity. Now it's like this fashionable thing where I see online Tantra courses being offered on the internet, and all these like modern tantric experts like get to know your orgasm, learn about tantra. And so I mean that's mainly like the the reason why I thought this would be like an interesting topic to discuss with you, because I know that whenever tantra has come up in our conversations through like coaching sessions and like our ongoing spiritual discussions, it's always been more about presence.
Hmm. I kind of want to take it back a little. You said you were talking about the sort of the tantric marketplace right now,
Right.
and there's definitely a hunger. There's a desire. People want depth, and they're searching for themselves, and they're seeking truth. And particularly around relationships, they're looking for a certain level of conscious sexuality, or how to approach their relationships and their sexual relationships with meaning and connection to something greater than themselves. I think the issue for me comes in that very well-meaning, well-intentioned practitioners call in a whole lot of energy without the knowledge of what to do with it, or like what happens when it shows up, and how do we work with um, with life, which is at the essence what I feel that tantra is. Tantra for me is not confined to the bedroom or how we are in relationships. It's embodied spiritual practice. So it's when my spiritual practice isn't about only connecting to the divine or meditation or contemplation or some sort of spiritual realization, but when my practice also includes the deep levels of embodiment in and through my being, and it includes what some people might call shadow work, is a form of tantric practice. So I'm bringing presence and my feeling awareness into the denser, tighter spots in my body, in my system. And this merging of the light into the darkness, into the depth of our bodies and our being is, for me, is Tantra. So if in our practice, whether it be our sexual practice or our sitting practice or our relational practice, if we are clear that we're in service of something greater, and this mystery that we're bowing down to, through that grace, right, we can bring our attention into the depth of what it is to be human, into the depth of our trauma, into the depth of our unconscious, and we illuminate these places.
So it's kind of like a mindfulness practice that has to take into account the physicality. Like it's a physical mindfulness in a way.
And moreover, right, so then the light of awareness starts to merge with matter. Okay, so let's say what would be an example? Let's say fear, right? So you and I are relating, and say a deep layer of fear starts to show up, and we feel this in our bodies, right? So our capacity to not just see it, which would be mindfulness, right? So in mindfulness, I'm becoming more aware.
Right.
Right? And this is like kind of top top level of what's happening.
Yeah.
Right? Then if I take it down and I don't just witness it, but I start to feel it and I'm embodying it and I'm owning this deeply in my system. And through that awareness, I sit in that, and then you and I, we relate in it.
Right.
That fire of our awareness is that which starts to transmute what before had been shoved into the unconscious in a way. So with this comes just great responsibility. It's not something that we can necessarily do right away.
From what I read in that then 70s book, like it's been a practice that's been passed down from master to teacher, but through experiential knowledge. Like, not, you can't just like read about it in a textbook, or like it's one of those practices that requires like the teacher disciple presence. And I think it's because of this that you're speaking of, because it's really about the embodiment of the energy. So if you don't have the other person there to relate it to, or to like create the dynamic of it, then it's not going to, it's just going to stay in the intellectual realm. Because you can understand something intellectually, but you have to learn how to like actually embody that practice. How can we explain to people who don't know anything about Tantra what would be the idea of a non-dualistic path, or the non-dual path?
And the first thing is, I want to clarify that I don't at all claim to be an expert in Tantra. And this is very important, because there's many people that do claim to be experts, and that's great. What I am is a practitioner. So through my practice, I've developed a deep passion for this topic, and also a little bit of an allergy to many of the kind of the new age version of Tantra, which in and of itself has been interesting, because it's like if I have an allergy to something, that's very dualistic, right? It's like,
Right.
what is non-dual? Non-dual is not two. I'm very clear that I am sitting in the place of I am me and there's Veronica.
Right.
Right? So my framework that I'm bringing is the dual.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think being non-dualistic is pretty hard. I don't think it's like an easy spiritual.
Maybe like I one of my teachers, my primary teachers, Thomas Hubel, one of the ways that he puts us is like, it is possible for us to say we win the cosmic lottery. And then just like the light of awakening lands here, I won the lottery. And then I realized this non-dual state that for most people is elusive. And then also, he says, through spiritual practice, over time, we can also move in this direction. About 12 years ago, I had a heart realization. So there, for a period of time, I experienced life as interconnected, like an interconnected love field, a very unified field. And even that I wouldn't call non-dual. So how do we, from a dualistic place, move towards the non-dual? What makes that Tantra? That's kind of the question here for me. There was a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner that came here to where I am. I'm in New Orleans. I thought the way he framed it was great. He was talking about the path of the Bodhisattva. And the path of the Bodhisattva was the path of the practitioner that's walking down the road. So if you're walking down the road, which is it's the path of right action from your heart, each step You care that it's the right action, that you're living a life of alignment. So he's like, what happens if you're walking down the road and you trip and you fall? No problem. You just get up and you keep walking. Then he compared the tantric path to somebody riding on a high-speed motorcycle. And so he's like, if you're riding high speed down the highway on a motorcycle and you get into an accident, the consequences are greater.
Mm.
And that to me was really at the heart of how I feel this embodied practice is, which is what I feel Tantra is. Everything in my life experience is brought into the cauldron. So it's not just right action, it's also my shadow aspects. So the parts of me that are living out of alignment. I'm calling these parts out of the unconscious and I'm bringing it into the fire of awareness.
And integrating them.
Yeah, and the integration happens not because I'm doing something and I understand it now, but it happens through this embodied feeling awareness.
I think it's interesting that this practice is becoming popular now as we enter the Aquarian era. Tantra has been around for thousands of years, but it's been so like hidden and so kind of kept secret as a secret path. And even the Buddhist tantric yoga practitioners for decades, and they have been kind of weeding out the tantric sexual practices from Buddhism and kind of becoming more celibate. Yes. Yeah, they've become more celibate, more like the rituals in Buddhism have been from an actual practice or an actual ritual have actually become like just symbolic prayers and to the deities in a very like prayers to Shakti or whatever, and not really concreting the actual practices. Over time they've kind of been watering them down, and there's less tantric Buddhist practitioners now in the modern era than there were maybe a few hundred years ago. And now I'm going to bring up another Daniel Odier quote from his book, The Tantric Path to Awakening. He says, in an era where the word communication reigns, where an unlimited mass of information can be accessed within a few seconds, we complain about having lost contact with our body and with other human beings. We suffer from extreme solitude. We suffer from no longer touching each other. We suffer from the virtualization of our feelings, the expression of our emotions, and our own sensorality. And no other time has this been more important than right now, when we've just been through 3 months of isolation and 3 months of no touching, no hugging, no breathing on people.
I mean, from what I can tell, there's a reason we're alienating. There's a reason people are going towards ways of numbing themselves. So part of what I've been doing with my teacher is we've been studying the effect of trauma, personal trauma, intergenerational trauma, and collective trauma into our perception and into our bodies and into all the way through the DNA, and all the ways that centuries of wounding affect the way that we're able to see life. So parts of our system have learned to downregulate and to numb out and to hide places that are painful. So if we're sitting in a whole lot of pain and we don't know how to be with it, and we don't know how to transmute it and how to shift it, our best option is to alienate ourselves, to disassociate.
Mm-hmm.
So on one level, could be very harmful, but on another level, it could be our best option. And the reason that the tantric path is the motorcycle accident, potentially, is if I start to bring up some of these fragmented parts, or the parts of me that I don't fully own, and then I don't know what to do with it, I can get really lost. And some of what we're seeing in the shadows in the spiritual community, including one of the communities that we come from, that we met through doing Kundalini yoga, and so many other practices right now in which the guru figure is falling. Why is the guru falling? Because we're becoming aware of shadows in certain guru fields. We've started to find out that some of these leaders have been practicing very shady sexual practices and there's been power dynamics that they've been using, and abusive techniques that have come out have been implemented into the field of practitioners with this idea that this is going to liberate you, or this is Tantra, so this is going to, like, you know, we need to meet the darkness, and so that means you need to go through hazing, and you need to go through this and that, and this is going to be your way to liberation. And so this is sort of coded in trauma and a lack of clarity. If ethical alignment isn't a part of our practice, we can get easily lost.
I mean, it seems like Tantra would be a place where things could easily get muddy. If anything goes and anything can be Tantra, if being in the darkness can be Tantra, then you're meeting those wounds in people, then you can easily get, like, shit can get fucked. like, basically.
Really, this all lives in each of us.
As a society, I feel that we're still coming to a point of sexual liberation, that there's still a lot of taboos, and that part of the Aquarian era is going to be exploring sexuality differently. Astrology.
So I have a question for you. Is your draw to Tantra partly about exploring your own liberation through sexuality?
Yes, I would say that I would say that I have some issues with
In that, some interest in healing and some interest in exploring that. And what I would say to most people, why do you have to call it Tantra?
It's the sexual yoga. And that's how it's described in a lot of texts. It's like the sexual branch of yoga that's kind of like been kept on the side historically. And I feel like we can't really, I mean, sexuality shouldn't be avoided. I mean, I feel like I've hidden away from my own sexuality through my spirituality for many years. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm attracted to the path, because to the whole idea of Tantra, of sensuality, or of being in touch with my physicalness, because I came to the yoga practice because I was so detached from my body. And I don't know where that detachment happened. I feel like I was always detached from my body, and then I realized I was detached from my body as a high schooler, when I don't think I felt like I wasn't aware of anything below my neck. It's just like I was like a brain walking around in a sack of, of limbs. And when everybody was exploring their sexuality in adolescence, I didn't have any concept of how to even begin. And it could be like my historically like Catholic upbringing, which like that's in the Spanish culture, and like the taboos and the let's not talk about sexuality. And so
Right. And so I'm not saying let's not do conscious sexuality work and let's not do embodiment work, and let's not heal these places, and let's not connect to the primal energy and our connection to life, our connection to our aliveness, our connection to movement. Like all of these things are relevant. The tricky part for me is when we take this practice and then we start to make it convenient for our consumerism and for our spiritual marketplace. Kind of like the way I feel it is like there's this sacred service that happens through this work, and we don't need any of the bells and whistles that then we're trying to put on top of it. Mm-hmm. We don't need any of this shiny, Instagram poses with our headstands and all of this. It's like the fact that you're interested in this exploration and you're wanting to find out more about what it is, that is beautiful. And I think that that's a great thing. And that's very much, I feel where I am as well. And I think also an awareness that there's a lot of unconscious patterns that play out in this field as well.
Right, because a shadow would come up in these practices.
Define what a shadow is?
Yes, let's do that.
The term first came through Jungian psychology, and it just refers to that which is unconscious. Mm-hmm. So a shadow, by definition, is not something that we know. A shadow is something that we're not aware of. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what we think is our shadow is like the mud that's been stirred up in muddy water, and then we're seeing through the clouds. So we're seeing the symptoms. We don't fully know what's underneath.
We don't know what's moving the water. We just see the water moving. We're seeing the consequences of the shadow, not the actual shadow. Okay.
Yeah, and then through the symptoms, we can get deeper, we can get closer, we get more to where it's hot, where it's burning, and then we can care for it. Mm-hmm. And that is the process of transmutation, of alchemy, and this is a tantric practice.
Let's talk about that, about alchemy, like so what I'm gathering from the conversation is that one of the big points of the tantric practice would be to transmute, to be able to tap into whatever energy and sense it in yourself and allow it to transmute it, like have the actual self-control and practice through the discipline to be able to know what's going on within you and know how to direct your energies, whether that's a sexual moment or not. Really, it comes down to any energy, like how to control your own physicality and how those energies move within your physical system.
Alchemy is a healing. Mm-hmm. It's a healing that happens. And I'm remembering this conversation very recently with my teacher where he said that healing happens through grace. Mm. So if I if I learn all the techniques and I'm doing all this stuff and I'm like trying to heal and I'm now an alchemist. I am now a sexual alchemist. Because I know all these techniques and I know all these tools, but then I forgot what it is that I'm bowing to. Mm-hmm. And then I forget, where does grace come from? Mm-hmm. What is grace? Where does it come from? Mm-hmm. Without that element of something greater than myself, I'm going to get lost. Mm-hmm. There is no alchemy. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first thing. So we have the principle of connection to the divine. And then next, we're really looking at the different layers of embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
So we're connecting to the divine and we're moving through the different layers of our building, through our mental plane, through our heart plane, our emotional field, and through the physical embodied aspects. So we need that divine grace to make its way all the way through,
Mm-hmm.
complete itself, like fully embodied. And in that process, where it gets hot, through our feeling awareness, through our presence, that's where the alchemy takes place.
Right. With that Kundalini fire.
Kundalini goes up, but we're also talking about that which is going down.
Right. Right.
Very, very, very important. Because a lot of people are cultivating their sexual energy to go up.
To go up. Yeah. To leave the lower chakras.
What can happen is that there can be a disassociation or a break,
Mm-hmm.
which will lock in place the places that are traumatized, that are split already.
Mm.
And it will leave them locked in their little time capsule in my nervous system.
Right, which is probably how those like dangers of Kundalini rising things come up.
Exactly. In like what people call Kundalini emergencies and all of this stuff, it's because there's been a break
Mm-hmm.
in the system, or something was shocking, or there was a trauma that got awakened,
Mm-hmm.
and then the individual splits off from their embodied presence.
Right,
Right?
right. Makes sense.
Yeah. And so then I can have a major I can have a spiritual emergency
Right, right,
because I've lost my connection to here.
right.
Bodies serve a very, very, very good purpose. If we didn't need them, we wouldn't have them.
It's true.
And I think the practices that are aiming to get us out of here are potentially very dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. I find very dangerous this society that is trying to make us live in a virtual world. It's really difficult to make intimate connection when you're just most of the interactions are happening on a screen, through texting, through a very detached kind of relation way of relating to one another. And I feel that it's really important that right now, as human beings who are trying to move on from this massive global pandemic quarantine thing, that we have to remain in our bodies. we, we we have to stay present with ourselves, and we still have to make connection.
Why are we living in this? Where it seems that I'm disempowered, where it seems that I can be manipulated. Where have I left myself open that now I feel I can be manipulated? What are the parts of me that are disowned, disembodied, where there's nobody home? And then these become the gaps in my awareness that then leave me vulnerable in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So if we take our practice seriously and we are into this, say, holistic tantric practice, that this is my life and I'm dedicated to a life where I will discover the shadow and I will take responsibility for it. That means that any expression, so we were talking about the symptoms and the mud, any expression of this in our lived reality, I have a role to play in it. So I need to take a bite of it
Mm-hmm.
and my part in it.
to somebody who's disembodied, like I have been for many years before I became a yoga teacher, how would somebody who feels really disconnected from their body start to have like a sense of how of going of that when you talk about going within and feeling inside your body? What would be like um, a small practice or something really easy that you can do when you feel yourself kind of detaching, when you sometimes when you're faced with a certain situation and suddenly you disconnect from the feelings that are that are happening in your body, and if you catch yourself in that moment of detaching from your body, what would be like something like a trigger or a way of thinking about it or something to bring you back, like?
Well, I think once again, I have a lineage behind me.
Yeah.
And what I would say is right now, Veronica, what is happening in your body as you ask this question?
um well, I have like a lot of heat in my body. I feel very warm, like in my chest and belly,
Mhm.
and had I feel more in my body right now having the conversation with you than I have felt pretty much all day. I've been very kind of like disconnected and maybe nervous about the events this weekend and like getting everything organized.
Yeah.
And through talking, I feel like I've landed more in my body.
So one thing that I can immediately say is to notice the way that a part of you moves really quickly, right? Like the air part, the Mercury principle, right? The part that moves. And then notice the speed of your body.
Mm-hmm.
Notice that it moves at a different tempo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then in between, we have our feeling body, our emotional body.
Huh.
And it has another speed. And what would be the flavor of your emotion right now?
The flavor.
What would be
Um,
if you had to touch it?
like a little bit prickly
Mm-hmm.
and warm.
So if we're naming emotions, mad, sad, glad.
So, all right, naming emotion. I was anxious.
Yeah.
I would feel some, like I probably have some anxiety in my body.
Mm-hmm. Great. So then that would be one way. So now you started to more identify what's happening in your system. Whereas before, also to notice that you were kind of looking up for the answer. And
Yeah,
then
it's interesting. Yeah.
body,
No,
what's
down.
body, and then a part of you goes up.
Hmm.
So that right there is very interesting. And it's a very good cue for you that like to get that reflection that when I'm trying to feel my body, I have all the intention to feel my body, but a part of me.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So that you can start to become aware of that. And then slowly you can become aware of what is that serving? Why is that serving you?
Hmm.
It serves a purpose. And so the embodiment work is a moment to moment practice. And also, you take time, you dedicate yourself, you sit down, you feel yourself.
Hmm.
You uncover the layers of, like, I would, for me, it's very important to bring it down into the body and to also look at your feelings, your emotional composition.
Hmm.
So I do that moment to moment in my relationships. When I'm talking to you, how much of me have I been able to feel during this conversation? How much of me was split off? there's definitely been some of that going on for me here, right? And
Mhm.
so I have a moment to moment practice, and then I also have times where I sit with myself and I investigate what's going on,
Mhm.
these different layers of my composition. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I can bring that awareness to the dance floor. Some people really need to move,
Mhm.
and then other people have a harder time sitting still.
Mhm.
Really sit still. So it's more specific to the person. And each one of us needs a process on our own, and then we also need a relational process. There's some things that we can't transmute on our own.
Right. We've talked about this before, which let's give a little synopsis of that, of this whole, of what you just said about how you, for some things we need the other person. Like, so when you when you're feeling your body, and when you're sensing yourself, or when you're trying to transmute something within, it's like in your closed system, right? Or you're the person feeling is like their own system. And so if you have another person there, can you explain that process? Because I think it's interesting that we explain it, because people won't understand what we're talking about.
Well, we just started to do a little bit of that. So I
Mhm.
started to ask you questions to become aware of layers of what's happening in you right now.
Mhm.
And then the reason that we need a presence outside of ourselves is that even if we've cultivated, say, a high level of spiritual awareness, I can connect to the divine, there's spaciousness, there's going to be places in me where I get tighter,
Mhm.
where it's hard to like not identify with these places.
Mhm.
And usually, or often, these places came out of a traumatized relationship or something that happened through our development that was more difficult. And through that break in relationship, we need to heal the relational space.
Mhm.
So if I get anxious, maybe there's a part underneath there that's maybe is scared.
Mhm.
And maybe if I feel scared, and then I can feel that somebody's really with me, then
Mhm.
that part of my nervous system can rewrite itself.
Mhm.
And that part of me gets to feel another option. Say my parents were too busy.
Mhm.
They were too busy and they meant well, but they couldn't give me that depth of seeing that I needed. So if I was scared, they couldn't quite be there for me to like run to, and then okay, I feel better now, Mom. Thank you. Let me go back into the world. If I didn't have that, I need to find a way to recreate that in my system.
Mhm.
And this is where therapists, coaches, teachers are very helpful.
Right.
And then also, you know, if you want to explore tantra as a conscious sexuality, these principles also work there.
Mhm.
So we increase our levels of awareness, we increase our capacity to stay with what comes up,
Mhm.
we increase our capacity to be related to each other
Mhm.
in whatever's emerging. And this is this these are all like the ingredients that we're throwing into the cauldron, and in that cauldron is where the alchemy takes place.
Mhm.
We're mixing all of the elements, the feeling awareness and presence, the different levels of, say, emotion or energy that moves through our bodies, and all of these things
Mm-hmm.
which creates transformation.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes sense, and it also makes me think that everyone really needs to learn these ways of sensing themselves. We're not taught this. Like, I wasn't taught to sense my body, like, or to sense my feelings, or to be able to acknowledge them. You almost only acknowledge the ones that are really obvious, like when you're crying, or
right.
Well,
it's also important to notice it's not that we're broken, that we can't feel. No, it's that we're traumatized.
right.
So we have to learn to put, the genocide of indigenous people into the unconscious, the civil wars, like, for example,
Right.
to visit you in Spain, and it's very clear that there's deep trauma in the places in which we live. Slavery here in the US, these things don't just go away.
Right.
The same way that our childhood traumas don't just go away.
Right.
And now science has also been proving through epigenetics that it's also passed down from generation to generation in the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no wonder we have disassociated and disconnected from being here. Because being human and being here can be freaking painful.
Mm-hmm.
Can be really painful.
Mm-hmm.
So then, we're just creating relational fields where the grace is present, where the love is present, where we care for each other, and we care for all these places that have been harder for us to meet in ourselves.
Mm.
And it's, we just do it. And we don't know where it's going to take us. We don't know that we're actually going to have like this enlightened society and the Aquarian age is going to come and we're all going to ascend into this, like, spiritual beings in a body. Well, great. That'd be awesome. And in the meantime, we have a lot of shit to clean up.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to really take a good hard look at our life.
Mm-hmm.
If they are manipulating us into this, then who are they and where am I giving them power?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a place in me that I'm cut off from that then I can re-own, and then there isn't anybody that's going to manipulate me.
Right.
Because once that fullness of our presence is here, there's no question.
Right.
Yeah.
So in summary, I would say that these tantric practices that are resurfacing in our modern day could give us an opportunity as a society and as human beings to really come back into touch with our own physicalness and our own embodiment, and that through that embodiment and through that presence in our physicality and understanding our physicality, we can alchemize and we can heal the trauma.
It's the embodiment and it's the divine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's meet. It's the Shiva and the Shakti.
Right.
Light and the dark. And the meeting of this through our relation, through our awareness, through our feeling presence.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Tantra. So you could say Tantra is transmutation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mixing up and clearing up and bringing to a more it's a more to our more essential place: wholeness, truth, reality.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we covered it.